Out of all the Sonic games I'm going to discuss in this series, Colors easily has the most modern Sonic levels. A big reason for that is simply that this game is all Sonic all the time. That's right, there's no side gimmick or alternate style of play, just you and the whole hog. But there's an obvious question that rises to the surface with this. Will these stages be able to maintain a high level of quality when there's so many of them? Well, first impressions are good considering the look of these stages. The aesthetics, each of them tied around an amusement park setting, are great. While the standard definition version of Unleashed looked nice, this one certainly has a stronger visual identity, and I think the consistent theming does a lot to help it stand out. In fact, this is easily one of the best looking Wii games out there. But this video is supposed to be about the gameplay, isn't it? Well, just like with Unleashed, the appearance of these stages plays into that too. See, each of these worlds begins with a 3D section of some sort that is almost entirely spectacle. At most, the player is boosting in a straight line and maybe jumping a couple times, but the focus is squarely placed on setting the mood. And if that mood is boring or bland, then that's gonna matter, since it's clear parts of these stages were designed around showing them off. Fortunately, the game mostly justifies the time spent on this. All of this stuff is oozing with personality, and it truly has its own identity. Sometimes I just had to stop and take in all the details, and how much work was put into this game to make sure all of its areas felt fully realized and unique is genuinely impressive. And it's a good thing it looks good too, because like I said before, a lot of this is focused on spectacle. I mean, in particular, the 3D sections, there's a ton of it that's just showing off the environments and sending Sonic through scripted set pieces. Of course, Unleashed already did this, but I'm emphasizing it more because this game takes it to the next level. At points, it gets to be a bit much. No, it gets to be a lot much. For instance, Act 1 of Starlight Carnival. Oh gosh, we start off with 55 seconds of 3D gameplay where the most you can do is sidestep and boost. Then we go back for another minute and 18 seconds of this. Then we cap off the level with 18 more seconds. So basically, by the end, I spent about half of this level just stuck watching over-glorified cutscenes. To be fair, this might be the worst example in the game, but there's still so much of this stuff. Really, at a point, this starts to feel like a 2D game with lots of cool 3D cutscenes and QuickTime events breaking up the actual meat of the game. Which, yeah, it actually kinda is. Now, this is no major discovery, plenty of other people have noticed this, but I was surprised by just how heavily this game favors the 2D side of things. In that regard then, sure, this game is probably gonna disappoint those who are expecting more 3D focused gameplay like the last home console releases, but that doesn't necessarily make this bad. I mean, Savannah Citadel from Unleashed HD is one of my favorite Sonic levels, and that was mostly 2D. Bring it on, baby. I'm ready. So with all that out of the way, how is the actual meat of the level design? Well, first off, the game has slowed down considerably. Where the boost meter in Unleashed HD could be charged in a variety of ways, and it really wasn't that hard to always have it at the ready, this game wants the player to slow down. As such, now you can only get boosts from these containers of Wisps and the occasional enemy who carries them. That's not to say you won't have enough boost. Nah, it's easy enough to get them for parts of the stages that want you to use them, but it's also a lot more common to run out, or even if you do have a full boost, for the stages to not exactly be designed for you to blast through them. See, to me, the most enjoyable way to approach Unleashed stages in both versions of that game was with the goal of going faster, of holding onto that boost and blasting through the whole thing as quick as possible and taking the fastest paths. With Colors, that can be fun in certain instances, but it doesn't feel like as much of a focus. Instead, this game presents the player with more platforming challenges, along with an increased focus on thorough exploration of the stages. Sometimes it leads to a game that feels more traditional in design. Take Aquatic Park Act 2. This one is centered around two basic mechanics: these sets of raising and lowering platforms that change their position as Sonic stands on them, and the blue Wisp, which allows Sonic to swap these blue blocks for blue rings of sorts that he can collect, or to solidify them into something he can stand on. The stage starts out showing this mechanic in a safe environment where the player is unlikely to fall since there are these blue platforms as a safety net. Following this, the player can either continue with a fairly similar setup, or choose to take the lower but more dangerous path where they can fall to their doom, but there they will be rewarded with a red ring, the game's main collectible. Afterward, the player can continue on a fairly basic trek down below or climb higher, jumping on another one of these platforms and transforming the blue blocks at the right time to reach the red ring at the end with well-timed jumps. So, in this level, we've remained tightly focused on a particular idea, and it's slowly evolved into a more difficult form. It feels fair, easy to understand, and to me, simply enjoyable and well designed. And there are plenty of moments like this. There's Tropical Resort 6 with these spinning platforms, Starlight Carnival 4 with these green balls the player needs to dodge throughout the stage, Planet Wisp 5 use of these golden platforms that break when a projectile hits them, Asteroid Coaster 2's gravity-based trickery combined with these blocks that will push the player to their doom, and I could go on. In particular though, I really like these level layouts where the stage winds around a spire, and the player needs to platform their way to the top. Really, even though this focus on traditional platforming means that speed has taken a back seat, and there's little to none of the classic game's momentum-based movement either, I like the idea of a Sonic game that's more focused on this sort of thing. I'm not inherently opposed to that. But, unfortunately, not all of these stages have such strong gimmicks or progression. Honestly, there are some real stinkers in the mix. Like this golden bouncer that follows Sonic as he goes through the stage. It ripped control away from me, felt unintuitive, would randomly start moving in different directions in a way that was difficult to predict, and I just hated it whenever it popped up. It didn't only slow Sonic down, it brought the game to a grinding, repetitive halt. The same can be said for these obnoxious sections with lasers and buttons you gotta stand on. Here, the player just has to wait for things to go into a position where you can move past them, and I don't really get what the point was here. These obstacles would have only been more interesting if they turned on their own and the player needed to actually time their movements. This way, they force the player to stop for no reason. However, as I mentioned earlier, many of the game's stages focus far less on straightforward platforming from point A to B, and more on thorough exploration. In fact, it kinda reminded me of Sonic CD at certain points, though a lot less extreme than that. See, in each stage there are 5 red rings. Many of these stages actually feel built around the red rings, to the point that much of the stage's substance can only be found by trying to collect them. Really, since they give the player a major boost in points and S ranks are primarily focused on that final score, they are also often the difference between an A or S rank on a stage. Fortunately, despite a few that are hidden in obtuse ways, most of these are tucked away in totally reasonable locations without being too easy to find, and they genuinely require that the player read the level layouts well and come to fully comprehend them. And the main way to access many of these is via the Wisps. While laser mainly acts as a way to bypass certain sections of the stages or access secrets, the rest of these are alternative styles of play. Modes Sonic goes into that are only useful during largely scripted segments or are, at the least, highly situational. That's not to say that's inherently a problem, they still do their job of changing things up from time to time, but it is different from how many might expect a power-up to function. At times, Wisps are the best part of the game. Correctly using one to find a hidden red ring and access a challenge is a wonderful feeling. For instance, look at these spike sections where the player must properly assess the level geometry to move forward or discover secrets. Then there's Cube, which has loads of potential for unique platforming challenges based on carefully planning your route. Frenzy, meanwhile, acts as a cool cinematic break, and it can be pretty darn satisfying to just tear through enemies and obstacles. Floating through spiky sections after using Rocket or discovering where a collectible is hidden in the sky, using Hover to weave through obstacles, using Drill to tear through layers of Birthday Cake and Sweet Mountain, all of these are solid moments. But you know what isn't solid? The way Laser and Hover often let me bypass huge chunks of the stage with ease, trivializing platforming challenges that could have been interesting. The sometimes awkward controls with Spike as it clings to walls, the start and stop nature of Cube and Rocket, the overuse of Frenzy during certain sections to the point that it becomes monotonous rather than intense, and Drill, a basic gameplay style that would be fine in and of itself, but is overused to the point of tedium. Yeah, so I have a problem with every single one of these Wisps, and honestly, by the end, I was just so tired of them and their gimmicks. At a point, it felt like the majority of my playtime had been spent in these various Wisp forms or having my movement interrupted by them, which I'm sure isn't true, but that doesn't change how it felt. At their best, they were a nice way to explore the environment and shake up gameplay. At their worst, though, they were beyond mind-numbing for me. But unfortunately, even that best part of them was significantly marred by how they're unlocked. Because yeah, you don't immediately have access to all the Wisps on your first run through. Instead, you have to unlock them in later stages, then come back and use them to collect the red rings and all that jazz. At least to me, it seemed mandatory to have them unlocked to get many of these S ranks and certainly to get the red rings. Since my favorite part of this game was thoroughly exploring the stages, that meant my first run through most of these levels was simply annoying. I knew that there was no point trying to explore all that much since I'd have to come back anyway. So I booked it through the stage as fast as I could, and really, most of them aren't all that fun to speed through, at least not for me. There are too many waiting-based obstacles or slow gimmicks, and even if I did go fast, it wasn't exactly encouraging to receive a low rank at the end of it all just because I hadn't got a high enough Wisp bonus or whatever they call it. Sure, after unlocking all of them, this issue was a bit better, but by then I was already tired of using them and I didn't want to go back, replay stages, and use them again. To me, this is such an inherent problem with the game's design, and it's frustrating because it's so incredibly easy to fix. Just let me use the Wisp powers from the start. And this really makes it hard for me to forgive that issue. Maybe I wouldn't be so annoyed with this if I did enjoy speeding through the stages or more of the traditional platforming, but I had issues with that too. All too often, playing with the main goal of simply getting from A to B reveals just how little is going on in these levels as far as branching paths or skill-intensive moments are concerned. Beyond that though, Sonic's controls just didn't feel comfortable to me. Like sure, I could easily make these jumps if I took my time, but I only had to slow down so much because Sonic's jumps sometimes wouldn't go quite as high as I expected. And he drops too quickly, and he's still a little more slippery even though the game doesn't really feel like it's built around that. Now, I know plenty of people don't have these problems with his controls, and that's totally fair. But the fact remains that for me, I never liked how he handled, and I thought most of these stages would have only fared better with a more rigid game feel. Unfortunately, all this is to say that, despite its moments of potential, I don't find this to be a compelling evolution of the boost formula, or even all that entertaining as an alternative style of play. There are definitely moments to appreciate here, but for me personally, it just didn't have what I'm looking for from this type of game. However, there is still another game to discuss, Generations, and next time, of course, we're gonna go through that one. So if you enjoyed this video, I encourage you to subscribe as always. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good day. Bye-bye for now.